Joining.
Welcome, everybody. So excited. Thank you for joining us today. Please drop a message in the chat with your name, where you're joining us from, what you're thinking about, how you're feeling. It's really, really good to be here together. It's been a little while since our last conversation. I am I am Karen Fleshman, she, her pronouns. I'm coming from the traditional territory of the Ohlone people, also known as San Francisco, California. And I am really delighted to be joined by Michelle and Danny's dear friend Jane. So I'm going to pass it to Michelle.
Thanks, Karen. Michelle Simon coming to you from Long Beach, California, where I try as I might to undo the harm that white supremacy does every day. And part of that is I offer employment law services mostly to women in toxic workplaces, and just thrilled to be part of this ongoing conversation with all of you. And that, I'll pass it to you, Danny.
Hey, you all, good evening, and welcome to our conversation tonight. I'm Danny Smith Mathis. I am a woman who unapologetically seeks to advance respect for Black women in all industries. And I'm really, really excited tonight for this conversation. I know we're coming off of Karen's great sisterhood conference that she had in Northern Cal a couple of weeks ago. And I'm also excited for her to share not only about that, but also about a really, really dope book that she is going to share with us. And then we have our special guest, Jane Hall-Lute, who is my longtime sister and friend, sister from another mother and father. And we will get into a conversation directly with Jane, the three of us. But listen, tonight we're just going to have a conversation about friendship. And so, Karen, I'm going to throw it back to you before I introduce Jane. And let's hear about what happened at your conference and tell us about this book you've been reading.
Oh, thank you so much, Danny. So, yeah, back in 2017, March of 2017, I was really um, startled to see that the majority of white women had voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And I said, we really need to start healing the racial divides among women and getting women into a safe space outside of the workplace to have conversation and to get to know each other. So I started hosting one-off interracial sisterhood events, like evening events. And then during the pandemic, we moved to online events. And the feedback was always, we need more time, we need more time. So back in December of 2023, I was super excited to co-facilitate the first ever interracial sisterhood retreat. That was in Miami, Florida, and we had 15 women from all over the country. And then people were like, we love this. We got to do it again. So just in July 18th through the 20th, we had the second interracial sisterhood retreat here in San Francisco. This time we had 30 women, and they ranged in age from their teens to their 80s. It was very, very multiracial, uh, all different classes were represented. We had women we had a lot of attorneys actually, and we also had women who have been incarcerated. We had a wide variety of perspectives in the room, and just everybody had such an amazing time. And I really do believe that the patriarchy has worked so hard to keep us apart, because when women come together, when we unite across difference, we can change everything.
Sorry, I was on mute. Facts, 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 facts. So, Karen, What were the highlights of your sisterhood conference, and why would you say that some of us maybe that are listening in the audience would need, why would you want us to come?
I would want you to come because I think it's really important for us to have safe space for dialogue outside of the workplace that is an opt-in space. And also, this wasn't a thing where you could just swipe your credit card and come. Everybody had to fill out an application. We interviewed everybody to make sure that they were ready for the kind of container that my wonderful, wonderful co-facilitator, Rosie Kennedy, and I created. And as a result of that careful curation of who was there, we were able to have very deep conversations. Now, this does not mean that no harm occurred, or that we didn't make mistakes and have, but we were able to have a conversation about it, and people did not flee the room crying or depart angry. Like, everybody was able to stay in the room and stay in the conversation, and real growth occurred as a result. And I think we need more spaces like that, more opportunities to really get to know each other outside of the workplace, so that we can form those relationships. Because what the arc of the interracial sisterhood is, we're all suffering from intergenerational trauma as women in this country, including trauma we've inflicted on other women or that's been inflicted on us. And so we need to work on our own healing from that. And then from our own healing, we will be able to heal our relationships with each other. And from the healed relationships with each other, that's where we'll be able to heal our workplaces and our society, and ultimately the world, the community, right? Too often, I'm very involved in activism. We leap into, we're going to heal this problem in our community, we're going to heal this workplace. But until we are in right relationship with each other, it's very difficult to do that. And we often wind up splintering and not really succeeding at what we were trying to achieve in the community with our activism. So,
yeah. I want to segue. Are you throwing that to me, Karen?
yes, I'm throwing that to you, Danny.
I want to segue into our conversation more specifically tonight on friendships, and specifically friendships between Black women and white women, and why that is critical. So tonight, something that Karen just said, and Karen, I think we'll save the book information until the end so that people can really, you can really dive back into that a little bit. But what you just said, it made me think of you saying we have to get to that or back to that. So tonight, my friend Jane and I are an example of us not having to get back to anything. We don't have to get back to anything. She and I have always been friends. I was 13, she was 14. I've known this woman over 50 years. And we went to the same high school. We went to a Catholic girls' high school in New Jersey. Shout out to Rosemary Anderson, one of my colleagues, one of my freshman high school colleagues, who's here from East Orange Catholic, New Jersey, East Orange Catholic High School in East Orange, New Jersey. But when we met, what we didn't know is that we were second generation friends. Our fathers had already established a friendship. And so we didn't even know that, right? Like, when I met her, I didn't know our fathers were already friends. She didn't know that, right? It just didn't exist. So, but we didn't have to establish ourselves as friends because our fathers were friends. That's not even why our friendship established. Our friendship established because of a woman who was Jane's classmate, who was a dear friend of our mutual friend of ours, who is, God rest her soul, deceased now. But And Jane and I, the one thing Jane and I had in common, besides we went to the same high school, although she was a grade ahead of me, we like basketball. So, and our friend that introduced us, she didn't know a thing about basketball. So when Jane and I got together, she was never with us. And she was the whole reason Jane and I got together, right? And so my friend, and she was another Black woman, but my friendship with that person was never interfered with because Jane showed up, right? And so Jane taught me basketball. I'll always tell you this. She got a mean drive to the basket. And I had, my thing with Jane was I had to learn how to figure out how to beat that thing. But we became friends and remain friends. Like, look at us. Here we are in 2024. I met her in 1971. That was 53 years ago. Who does that? How many people are going to?
You're looking good, girl.
You too, honey. How many
Saying.
people on the face of the earth are going to be able to come on a Zoom call with somebody that they've known for 53 years? You know, I mean, come on. But so we might be the exception to the rule, but we don't need to be. And that's the point. The point of what you're saying, Karen, is there are women who just didn't have that opportunity that we had for whatever reason. We don't even know what the opportunity was. I just wanted to play basketball. She could teach me. And that was all there was to it. It wasn't about anything. There was no agenda except how to play ball. So let's talk about how we got here tonight. So Michelle, after the AOC, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jasmine Crockett thing, and AOC jumps into Jasmine Crockett's defense at that hearing, we all know what transpired after all of that, right? And so Michelle has this post that she puts on LinkedIn. I see the post after a conversation that Karen and I had before Michelle even put that post up. And Karen and I said, we got to do something. We got to talk about Black women and white women coming together and blah, blah, blah. So that thing with the Jasmine Crockett thing hadn't even happened. Then it happened. Michelle writes her post. I didn't even know Michelle before she wrote that post. So this is like, I've known Michelle like 8 weeks, like 2 months I've known Michelle. So I hit Michelle up on LinkedIn and I was like, Michelle, would you want to come on to a podcast with Karen and me and talk about what happened between Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jasmine Crockett, and how AOC factored into that whole discourse? And the point of the matter was that AOC came to Jasmine Crockett's defense, right? That sister had her back. And I then had a conversation with Michelle and Karen and said, hey, I know a white woman that will always I got an AOC in my life. And these women know, Karen and Michelle know, I started saying, I got AOCs in my life. And Jane is my AOC, right? Rosemary is another one of my AOCs. But really, seriously, we have to start talking about this. Like, what does that really mean? You know, Danny says it means ass kicking on call, but we're going to talk about it a little differently tonight. So then the conversation morphed into a second part where we talked a little more deeply about what AOC actually did and what she represented for a Black woman. And now we are here tonight saying, Karen, we had a conversation, the three of us, and said, you know what, we got to go a little deeper than allyship. And we have to talk about just good old fashioned friendships. And Michelle, you didn't even want to come on the conversation initially because, you know, maybe you didn't feel like you really had anything to offer, but we're going to get to that in a minute. So before we go any further, let me introduce our guest, my friend, my good friend, my dear friend, my sister friend, who I could call at 4 a.m. and not realize that she's on 4 a.m. time and she doesn't spank me too badly. So here is our former deputy secretary of Homeland Security under Bush and President Bush and President Barack Obama, right, Jane?
No, just President Obama.
Obama, okay.
Doug was in the Bush administration.
Oh, right. Okay, her husband was in the Bush administration. Okay. Currently serving on boards, Shell Oil, Atlantic, serving on the boards of the Atlantic Council and the Center for Internet Security, big into cybersecurity. You know, she was the CEO of a Swiss-based provider Actually, recently you were that, more recently, I think, that's a provider of currency and identity product and other kind of security solutions. And Jane also served as a, thank you for your services. She was a captain.
Hey, do you vote? Do you vote?
I vote?
Yeah, I'm asking you if you vote.
Absolutely. Why?
Thank you for your service.
Yes, ma'am. I vote. That's a big service, right? Yes, ma'am. I'm a vote. I'm an independent. I'm not Republican. I'm an independent. But anyway, Jane started her career in the Army, and she was serving on the White House National Security Staff for Bush. Didn't you? You did serve for George W.
Bush, Bush, Bush 41, and for Clinton, right?
And Clinton, right? And you were on the the U.S. Central Command staff during the
war,
Desert
in the
Storm.
desert, and
Desert Storm, Cold War in Berlin, right? So here we have a lawyer from Georgetown. She's a Georgetown grad. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I just love it. I mean, she's just got a lot. Go on there on LinkedIn, check her out. But this is my friend. I didn't even know she did all this stuff. We don't have to talk all the time and everything. But Jane, we had a conversation recently, right even before the show, about the difference between allyship and friendship. And what was the question you asked?
So I don't know why we need a special word. I mean, I don't come from this world that Karen was describing. I mean, when she started talking about the patriarchy, I was, thinking of the Byzantine Empire, because I'm reading Osman's Dream right now, which is the founding of the, how we got to the Ottoman Empire and the current world. And so I don't think in these terms. I don't think of myself as a victim. I don't think of you as a victim. I do think we've had trials. I am very attentive and persuaded that, women need to come together. And that was not the experience that I had when I was a young professional just entering the workforce. Michelle, I'd be really interested in your experience, and Karen, coming from very, very different worlds that we do. There were no one lying in the street with a brass band saying, "Oh my God, look, thank God there's a woman lieutenant here." Sort of exactly the opposite. But I don't know. I don't even know how to have this conversation. When people start inventing words, it makes my head explode. Why do we need allyship? If I think of allies, I think of the French and the British. I mean, I don't think of, somebody showing up at my parade. And so I don't know that I don't know how to help you. So this may be the shortest guest appearance on this show in the history of this show, but I'm happy to be here.
But this is the reason for the conversation. I want to throw it a little bit, and thank you for that, but we're going to come back to you. But Michelle, what's your response to this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it does go to the heart of what we want to talk about, which is what happened to good old-fashioned friendships, and why is it that friendships tend to, like, I have all white women friends. I mean, with a couple of exceptions. And, I certainly grew up with different, kids from different backgrounds in New York City. I can think of one friend I've maintained who wasn't white, but no, I didn't make any lifelong friendships with Black people, like you did, Jane. And then in later adulthood, I feel like, I have some long-term friends, again, almost all white women. And as I get older, I find it's just hard to make friends, period. So like a few years ago, I moved from Northern Cal, where, I had a number of friends, down to Southern Cal. And, it's been hard to make any friends, period. So that was, why I thought, well, I don't know if that's really my contribution is. I just find it hard to make friends. I think it's an important point you're making, Jane. Why are we making up words like ally? Why can't we just be friends? I mean, I'll just say my experience is I haven't really had, or maybe I haven't created. I mean, this is what I want to know. I want to put it to the brain trust here. Like, I just feel like I don't have opportunity to make friends, with Black women. Like I have so many Black women in my life. I can think of one or two that I might call a friend. I don't know. Would they call me a friend? I'm not sure. So yeah, I just think friendships these days are challenging, and unless they're long-standing friendships like yours, I don't know. I'm just questioning, like, how do we do this? And Karen's program is great, but let's be honest. I mean, like, I wanted to go. I couldn't travel from Southern Cal. It costs money. Like, I don't want to have to spend a lot of money just to make a friend, from a different background than mine. Like, that just seems not realistic. So, so I'm just stymied with how to make those real relationships that you're talking about.
I'd like to respond if that's okay, Danny.
Go ahead, Karen, go ahead, because Ebony Freeman just said the struggle to make and maintain adult friendships is real, in my opinion. And that is a Black woman speaking. So go ahead.
That is so true. So I would say a couple of things. One, the reason why there is not more strong friendships between white women and Black women is multifold. I mean, number one, it's by design. White supremacists wanted to keep us segregated, neighborhoods, schools, keep us apart, and then inundate white children. Like, I remember going to elementary school in my all-white elementary school, because I grew up in a town that had been a sundown town, where we had school assemblies led by police officers designed to deter us from taking drugs as part of Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. And it largely consisted of films of Black people overdosing on heroin. So from a very early age, the institutions that I was a part of were sending me all these really sensationalized images of Black people. And then I was only surrounded by white people. And my parents, they believed racism is terrible. Dr. Martin Luther King is wonderful. And the way to not be racist is to be colorblind and treat everybody the same. But I never saw them do that, not by design on their part, but literally because we lived in an all-white community and all of our relatives were white. So as I grew older and started to question, well, why is there so much racial inequality? My parents taught me that we used to have terrible racial inequality. Then there was a civil rights movement. Now opportunities are distributed equally, and some families choose to work really hard. That's why we have what we have, and other families choose not to. And had I not had a very unusual life for someone who grew up like that, I would still believe that. I think that's what a lot of my white friends are telling their kids today, which is why I do a lot of work with white parents about what we tell our kids. The other part I would add is that in every interracial interaction, it's not just the two of us. It is Danny, me, Danny's ancestors and everything that they experienced at the hands of white women, and my ancestors and everything that we did to Black people. And that's why there's a lot of things that can go wrong in that interaction, that can cause harm in that interaction. The other part, and the third point I would make is that I have a lot of friendships with Black women, but I had to initiate, though they did not, they didn't come knocking on my door saying, can we be friends? I put myself out there. I put myself in spaces where I was the only white person often. And that was how those friendships were able to initiate. And then they could see that they were safe with me, that I wasn't going to cause them harm. And we still have problems. We still, these things come up, but we're able to work through them. So those are the 3 points I would like to make.
Jane, any comment?
So, Karen, that's really interesting to me. I don't think I can relate to any piece of it. And so what I'm trying to do is work through your vocabulary into what the message you're really trying to send. Okay. So I'll tell you a funny story. My mother, her sisters they're both passed, but they were talking about my grandmother who lived to be 100 years old. and Honey happened to be my mother's sister's name, was saying, oh, poor Ma, she had such a hard life. She was, tossed out on her ears. She didn't know her parents. She made her way here. That was a terrible thing. My mother looked at her and said, honey, it was 100 years ago. Let it go. And so in our family, so if you were ask me, Danny, say we had this conversation during the Black Lives Matter thing, because she was the first call I made. You ask somebody like me, what are you? Like, it never occurred to me to say, well, I'm white. Cue the video. But I mean, so I what I'm trying to hear through what you're saying. And by the way, I have to say, at the outset, you acknowledge the ancestral lands of City and San Francisco. I'm in Utah, which is the ancestral land of the Utes. When I first heard someone do it, it was at Shell. I'm on the board of Shell, and I was visiting one of the sites of Shell in Canada. And the first thing they do is acknowledge the ancestral lands that they are operating on. And I remember when I was thinking, like, I'm from Newark. What, the ancestral lands in Newark? I don't know, Danny, do you? I mean, but there clearly are. And I thought to myself, you know what? That makes sense. That's something we ought to be doing. But I don't feel like there's anybody intermediating me and my friendship with Danny, or me and my conversation with you guys. I'm not standing under the weight of generations of generations. My mother's ethnically Jewish. We were raised Catholic because my mother's family had no religion. It was an ethnic thing. So she and her siblings took the religion of the person they married. My father was Catholic. We became Catholic. I didn't love it. And I don't raise my children Catholic. I raised them Jewish. That's how we identify, and there's 3,000 years of history, and, we can go there. But why? I mean, I don't feel like I need this intermediation of my personal engagements with other human beings on the planet. Yeah. I mean, and if the generations are bearing down on us, make room. It's a new day. And so, look, it's not perfect. I agree with you in that respect. We got a lot of work to do, but I don't feel, that feels for me, that would be completely inauthentic to be mediating who I'm engaging with. Now, maybe I'll finish with this point, Danny, because I was at the UN. So when I was at the UN, like ain't nobody white. Well, there are a lot of white people, okay, but that's not the most interesting thing about you, okay? So put it away. And I remember when I was coming back into the U.S. government, you had to fill out your security forms, and they said list all your international contacts, who they work for. I said, I'm not doing it. Well, we need to know who you know. I said, I'll start with Azerbaijan and I'll end up with Zanzibar. Okay, because maybe I'm just so colored, I'll use that word, by that experience, that I don't see what you see.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay, because we all see what we do see, right?
Danny, could I show this comment from Lucky Daniels?
Yeah. I think so, because I was gonna. I think did you put it up there before?
Yeah,
Karen?
I put it on for a second.
So Lucky says, and historically, white women have played a critical role in the oppression and trauma of Black women. There is the issue of cultural distrust and the need to establish relationships not anchored to this legacy. Perfect. That's exactly right. It's a new day. It's a new day. That's the new day right there, that we establish relationships that are not anchored to the legacy of what white women have in instances played a role critically in oppressing and traumatizing Black women. I mean, I was traumatized at work in a work situation 5 years ago, 6-7 years ago. I mean, really seriously, it caused me to move and literally to leave the state. I fled like Harriet Tubman. I left. I was out. In fact, the day I left, I wore a shirt. I should have worn it tonight that says, "We out, Harriet Tubman, 1869. I literally wore that shirt the day I resigned because 2 white women ran me out of the company. I couldn't fight it. But anyway, Michelle, what do you have to say, sweetie?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I do think this I want to talk about the distrust, right? Because I do think that's real, especially because I work a lot with Black women, especially, who are harmed every day in the workplace. And often it's by white women, not always, but often. And I am very aware of that. And I try to play a role in helping them navigate it, of course, and exiting these toxic situations. But I think we do have to acknowledge, and I'm very aware, if I'm on social media, that the way often Black people will respond to me is not me personally, but that I kind of represent a lot of that history and pain. And I do feel like it's something we just have to acknowledge and navigate. And I'm not really sure how to do that, but I do think it's real. And, as Karen mentioned, as white women, we carry a lot of pain too. And even if Jane doesn't relate to that, I mean, I certainly can, and feel like, okay, I know that I've done a lot of work on myself to try to get past, my own issues. And I want to show up in a way that is different than historically white women have shown up for Black women. And I guess it's just, and also I want to kind of I don't want to say this in a way that isn't weird, but be a model in a way for other white women, at least to not do harm, right? I mean, and we can just start there. And I just, I think about the ways that I try to show up. And that's not necessarily friendship. We're getting away from the friendship part now, but just, and I know ally isn't, I think it's really interesting that we have invented these other words. I think because it's so hard to find, and because of the design and the history, to find opportunities to make friendship, I feel like often all I can do is be an ally, right? So why have we made up that word? Well, I don't have friendships, but I can offer some free services to a woman, who's in a tough spot at work. And I just do that quietly, and, they thank me, and that's it, right? Or maybe I'm going to donate some money to an educator I like online. I do that, just because I want to do something, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's just how I'm navigating it. Like, okay, well, what can I do? Because I don't have these friendships, but at least I can, again, use my privilege in a way that is causing less harm, and maybe even, healing some of it.
Well, that's interesting, Michelle, talking about using your privilege to cause less harm. And I think that goes back to what Lucky was just really saying, is that there is that, and that and what Jane was saying is it's a new day. It needs to be a new day. And we do need to get back to the old fashioned thing. Don't call it an allyship. Let's establish friendships. Let's not talk about establishing allyships, because I said earlier, and I think it was before the show, that I think that whole allyship concept comes out of corporate America, out of the workplace, that men have defined what women's friendships are going to be like, that you need an ally, right? I didn't need an ally in 1971 when I met Jane. I didn't need an ally. I just had a friend. I developed a friend.
Can I just jump back in and say, here's why I think the word is useful. I think friendship is deeper, and it's, I think, almost letting white women off the hook to say the only way to show up is through friendship, right? Yeah. It's great if friendships happen. Let's say, you meet someone at work, you hit it off, hopefully naturally a friendship forms. But I think there are so many ways that white women, whatever word you want to use, can show up, right, to reduce the harm. Like these examples I gave. Like, I don't have to be good friends with the woman to offer her my services for free, right? And I've had women tell me, this is the work. And I'm like, yeah, this is the work. And so I guess I want to make space for different ways that white women can show up, again, like, whatever words we want to use, friendship is great. I'm not saying, I mean, I'm all for friendship, and I wish I had, look, you know, deeper friendships in my life in general, and particularly across race. I'm just saying, I don't think we should say it's either or, right? That we should make space for ways, because we have a lot of work to do as white women, right? And I'm not letting them off the hook for any of it. I think we should give white women a goddamn laundry list of things that we can be doing every goddamn day and not say, oh, go make friends with Black women, because let's face it, most women are not going to do that. But they could, if they have a service to offer, you know, if there's something they can do, if they can donate some of their, you know, inheritance, like, come on. Like, I just think all of it.
Wow.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Yes. It's interesting too. My friend Felicia Medina, who's a very successful plaintiff side employment discrimination attorney, who serves many Black women plaintiffs. When there is a white woman willing to corroborate her story, she gets much higher awards. It's much more likely to prevail. So there are very tangible things that white women can do. I think this is a very important point that Michelle is raising. And I would also add that as a white woman in the professional workplace, I was subjected to sexual harassment, wage gap, glass ceiling from white men in the workplace. But by far, the most psychologically harmful aspects of the workplace came from white women who were senior to me in the organization and perceived me as a threat to their proximity to white men in power. And just like you, Danny, they drove me out of the organization. They drove me into therapy because I was like, it took me a really long time to not hear this one. A woman told me, quote, you did not receive this promotion. You were not a serious candidate for this other promotion because you are perceived to be frothy and unnerving. Frothy, Frothy, like a cappuccino. And that's, you know, and that literally caused me to leave an organization that I loved, that I was like the most hardworking, you know, I loved that organization. And that was her words made me leave. So, yeah.
Before I go, I want to throw it to Jane, but before I do, I want to read a couple of these comments coming off of LinkedIn. They're just so dope. So frothy. Yeah, I love that, right? So Bill Stankiewicz says, yes, a great group here tonight. He said, a great conversation. Charmaine said, this is a great conversation. Someone just said, LinkedIn user, no name. I just spent 2 weeks in the Deep South visiting family, still so segregated by design. Southern hospitality seemed top layer. Interracial relationships, you got it, yeah, are few and far. Generations on both sides mostly keep traditions. So much healing and work to do. Absolutely, absolutely. But here's another interesting comment. Active allyship and advocacy, i.e. AOC, are important and necessary for Black women. Using your privilege in spaces where my voice or presence is marginalized. Absolutely. And so what white men have called that is sponsorship in corporate America. That's a sponsor in corporate America. When you're not in the room and a white person speaks up for you when you're not in there, and it's your performance appraisal, and you know they speak up for you when you're not in the room. That was another reason I left that particular company, is because after they reorganized and they got rid of my sponsor, I was a sitting duck. I didn't even have allies, let alone my sponsor was gone, and my two new supervisors were hardly my allies. I wasn't going to survive it. It wasn't going to survive it. And from if any of you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you can also subscribe to my newsletter called Corporate Hate Crimes, because I likened the corporate abuse that I experienced to the domestic violence that I experienced in my marriage. It was the same trauma. As a matter of fact, it didn't take, that's why I got out of that corporation as quickly as I could, because I had already experienced that whole process of leaving something that I thought I was going to be married to for a very long time. I wanted to retire in that corporation, and I just couldn't do it. It was just corporate abuse, the bullying, the gaslighting, the racism, the sexism, which was not man to a woman. The sexual harassment in my mind was the sexism was women to women. And that's where it's antithetical to everything we're talking about here tonight. So we have got to build a different type of culture, a different type of foundation in this America that we're talking about. We love, because if we don't love each other, we're toast. We're toast. Jane, I know you're processing.
I don't think I belong in this conversation, but since I'm here, I'm going to take up my space. I understand and hear and have heard. Look, I'm old. I went to the Army in 1976. Okay, that's when I went into the Army. All right, so I retired from the Army in 1994, 30 years ago. That's when I retired from the Army. Okay, and I've spent my whole adult life in large, far-flung, some say dysfunctional bureaucracies. Okay, what you described, Danny, losing your sponsor, not unique to you, not unique to Black women, not unique to women. It's unique to people who have a sponsor and the sponsor leaves. So I'm not trying to diminish the experience that you have, but what I'm trying to put it in a broader context of how do we make sense of what happens to us? And what are our lines of explanation that we give ourselves? Okay, when I was growing up, I was the problem. I thought, oh my God, they treat all lieutenants this way. No, they don't. They treat the female lieutenants this way. That took me 20 years to figure out. Okay, so I was not the one with the problem. I didn't know it at the time. But what I'm thinking, I cannot, and I'm not sure why this is true. But we all have these examples of, I don't know that I'm going to sound like an idiot, but Danny, so you got to help me out here. I don't know what it's like to go make a friend with a Black woman. My best friend in high school was Cece Hicks, who Danny was talking about. She was a Black woman. It didn't occur to me, making friends with a Black woman. Not that you're saying that, Michelle, at all, but it just didn't occur to me, right? Where we grew up, there were a lot of Black kids. Right? Where we grew up, there were a lot of Protestant kids. There were a lot of Jewish kids. There were a lot of Catholic kids. There were a lot of Portuguese kids. I mean, go figure, right? We had Lithuanian kids. We had Polish kids, Ukrainian kids. Everybody, if you said to somebody, what are you? They say, I'm Irish and Ukrainian, I mean, English was not my mother's first language. It was Ukrainian. Really? Ukrainian? If you had told me that Ukraine would be at the center of global news, I'd have laughed in your face, because nobody, I was 10 years old before I knew everybody didn't call sauerkraut kapusta. I'd like a hot dog with kapusta. What are you talking about? It never occurred to me along the way until much later that I was being treated the way I was being treated because I was a woman, and there were disadvantages in that. And so one of the things I did when I was at the UN is I led the Secretary General's response to sexual exploitation and abuse. And the thunderbolt that hit me is that there's not a woman on this call, there's not a woman that any person on this call knows over the age of 12. There is not a woman anyone on this call knows over the age of 12 that has not had to deal with unwanted comments, unwanted touching, or worse, because they're a woman. You don't know anyone. And that is, and I thought to myself, this is an ever-present danger for women everywhere. Why don't we act like we understand that? We need to understand that. And it's not because you're a white woman or a Black woman, they have different experiences. That's how women, okay. But I don't relate to this as my first, when you talk to women victims, what's the first thing they want? What's the first thing a woman who has been subject to demeaning comments or demeaning behavior or touching or assault, what's the first thing they want? They want to be believed. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want you to believe them.
That's true.
And so over the years, as I've been in this job, and people have sort of said, well, we have so-and-so who is accused of doing this to the women. I said, believe the women. Because they first of all, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. They don't want to relive this experience. And so I get that. Okay. But I don't live my life through the patriarchy. I don't even use that word literally, unless I'm talking about the Ottoman Empire. I don't live my life through this filter of whiteness. And so Danny and I had this conversation after Black Lives Matter. I said, when people use the word white privilege, I can't relate to white privilege. I mean, I'm from Newark. My parents were hardworking. We had some breaks. We went to good school. My parents were like dog on us about going to school. But did we have an advantage? Yeah, sure. I see that now. But when you use the word privilege, you're trying to hit me. And okay, what's the point of you hitting me?
That's a good point.
So just to finish this one point, I understand it now. But when, 3 or 4 years ago, when people were throwing this at me, I thought, okay, you're trying to hit me. Okay, come on. I will come back at you. But that's not the point. The point is a white person in a similar experience as a Black person or person of color is going to have advantages and be given, privilege or be given opportunities that person of color is not going to be. I totally get it. Final point. We need to be more conscious and present, I guess. So I grew up, English was not my mother's first language. She corrected our English every day. Me and him are going, no, him isn't going, he is going. He and I are going. My mother would correct my English. So my daughter works in LA and, among, majoritarily Black artists, that's where she's most comfortable. She managed Nicki Minaj for a while. She managed other, London on the Track, other artists that, people of her generation know. And one of her friends came to stay with us and she said something. I corrected her English and my daughter grabbed me by the throat. And she said, you cannot do that. I said, what am I doing? I'm treating her like you. She said, that's not what she's experiencing. You better wake up and pay attention, And I thought to myself, I know. And she was right. But I wasn't malintentioned that, and I wasn't even sort of doing a white privilege thing. I thought I was doing, a second generation American's version of, and what she said to me, there is no improper English. I had to learn that. I was 60 years old. I had to learn that. And so, okay, learning has occurred, but I don't know how any of this informs the journey that we're trying to put ourselves collectively on. I don't know. It's like, try and call your office party of one. So I get that. But I just think we're meeting these issues where we are. And I have always presumed, I know I said final point, I'll try and make this a final point. You only work with 4 people ever. You only ever work with 4 people. You work with high-speed people who are wonderful to be around. And you work with high-speed people who are jerks. And then you work with low performers who are lovely. They are just delightful. And you like to be around them. You like to see them every single day, but they are low performers. And then you work around low performers who are duds and jerks. Okay? 2 of those categories are easy to deal with. The high performers who are wonderful people, nice to be around, they get it, they connect, they're wonderful. The high-speed people who are jerks, and we encounter a lot of jerks in our lives, and people express jerky behavior, even though other people might think they're not jerks. Yes, what? You're a jerk. You're a complete jerk. So I don't know how to make room for people who are not at the advanced level of insight, sensitivity, vocabulary that this conversation is reflected, because I certainly don't feel there, but I'm there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like what you said, Jane, about the whole addressing the whole issue of white being hit with white privilege. And you did bring it home by saying that you do even recognize that inside of the disadvantage was an advantage. Even if you were in a disadvantaged situation and you don't see it as a privilege, there was an advantage, if you will. So we won't use necessarily privilege, but I like that. Yeah, and it's similar to what Lucky. I think that's exactly what Jane just hit on, is that it wasn't. We don't use it to hit white people, just using it to make them aware that, yeah, y'all got it. And I think you recognize that there was an advantage within the disadvantage. Michelle or Karen, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on first of all, to thank you so much, Jane, for your work on sexual assault and sexual violence. I myself am a survivor of, I was raped by a popular athlete in my high school in a very similar situation as Dr. Christine Blasey Ford with Brett Kavanaugh. And that's impacted me throughout my life. It has had a huge impact on me. And that whole part about survivors want to be believed. But I do think it is very important to understand that in our racist society, Black women are not likely to be believed. They're much less likely to be believed than white women. So we have to acknowledge the way that racism plays into these encounters. Even if, quote, we don't see color, it is always there. And I heard your point about how you worked at the United Nations, you worked with people from all over the world, but I think the relationships in the United States between Black people and white people are definitely impacted by our history of slavery. We could not, though, how can I put it? That history is always with us. And it is different if you are interacting if you are interacting with a Black person from Africa who never experienced slavery. It's going to be a very different interaction than if you are interacting with someone in the United States who's the descendant of enslaved people.
So Karen, I don't dispute what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but 100 years ago, nobody in my family was in this country. That's not exactly right. Now they have been, but all when I was growing up, I was a granddaughter of immigrants. So the slavery connection, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I will. I didn't know when the Civil War was. I could tell you more about Charles Martel. I could tell you more about Bismarck than I could about the history in the United States. It wasn't a thing for me growing up. It just, wasn't a thing. And so I hear you and I believe you, but I also know, and Danny and I have talked about this, because I've asked her, I said, educate me in the Black on Black role in the history of slavery, because what I saw in the UN was a color thing going on among people of color. And that was shocking to me, because I thought there was, complete solidarity among people of color. This now, we're talking a long time ago when I first started doing this kind of work. But so I hear what you're saying, but I guess what I'm just reacting to is I don't have the vocabulary, I don't have the words, but all I know is what I've told my children. I mean, one of my children is Vietnamese American, okay? One of my other daughters married to a Jordanian. My other daughter dated African Americans. And so I'm not congratulating myself. I'm just saying I'm trying to relate to the structural barriers you are putting, what feels like you are putting in front of my friendship with Danny, that I got to get through those barriers before I can be a friend to her. And I got to tell you, You know, it wasn't. It was Dave DeBuscher, Bill Bradley, Walt Frazier, Dick Barnett, Willis Reed. I mean, it was the jumper from the side. It was, if you don't learn how to use your left hand, sister, you ain't going nowhere. I mean, it was, it was,
Okay,
it was,
I
it
just
was.
want to jump in and say,
Again, I don't want to just sort of
Yeah.
say like, you know, that was the answer, but that's what I'm struggling with.
okay,
Yeah.
so I think a lot, that's beautiful. And I think you are fortunate in that you and Danny developed a friendship from childhood
That's right.
before any of this stuff kind of interfered. And I have a similar experience. So my childhood friend, I thought her family was from Egypt because that's kind of what they, and then I found out later they were actually from Palestine, right? And the politics never interfered with our friends. So I'm Jewish, right? And, you know, in the 70s, that would have been a big deal. But you know, it was, so I think it's very parallel, right? So I grew up with this girl. We played paddle tennis in the playground in New York. Politics never entered our friendship. She was welcomed in my home. And it wasn't until later that, like, we started talking about the Middle East. And it was like kind of a revelation to me. And we're still good friends, right? Because we never grew up with that. But if I were to, I mean, I think an unusual Jew, and then I'm definitely not pro-genocide, but I'm just saying, like, I think there's a lot of stuff, right, that happens between certainly Israelis and Palestinians now, you know, that I think we have to acknowledge, similar to as adults, white women in America trying to be friends with a Black woman in America, right? So I just think we need to acknowledge the difference between being kids and letting basketball be the thing that brings us together. Like for me, it was paddle tennis in the playground in New York City. And then your friendship just naturally develops. And, you know, you talk about politics later on. Same thing. I have a Black woman in my life who happens to be my personal trainer, right? And that's how we started our relationship. Well, now we talk about, you know, politics every week as she's training me. You know, it's like relationships evolve naturally. But I do think, but I just think we want to acknowledge still that it's can be challenging. And I like, there was a comment about, I think it was a woman saying she's kept cautious about friendship, this being the standard, that because white women want to be liked and Black women want to be respected, right? And there are cultural differences that affect both respect and power. Let's educate white women on how to respect and effectively share power. I mean, I think that does really kind of sum up at least part of the challenge. And at least it's white fragility, right? It's like, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. And I just want everyone to like me. It's like, no, just shut up and listen to what Black women have to say, you know? So
make room.
and to add a little bit, if I could, to your point, Michelle, the level of distrust that Black women have of white women, particularly after the 2016 election results, where 98% of Black women voted for a white woman and less than 50% of white women voted for a white woman. You know, and then to see that repeat, actually more white women voted for Trump in 2020 than we had in 2016. And so now we see this rush. All of a sudden, you know, it's white women for Kamala, and we're going to change all this. We're going to totally, but like there's been no recognition of all of this history of distrust and harm. And then also going into the office, it was interesting the point you raised about women. There's a fantastic book called Our Separate Ways. And it's two Black women business school professors who studied the first generation, your generation, I believe, Jane, of working women who got to the managerial level and above in corporate America. And they compared the experiences of Black women and white women in the workplace. And what they found is that they came into the workplace with very different understandings. So the Black women had been conditioned by their families from a very early age that they were going to face racism. They were going to face sexism. And the Black families help them to navigate what to do in these situations, how to understand what is going on around you and what to do to still succeed and thrive in these situations. The white women, no one ever told them that. No one said you will experience sexism. Racism was never mentioned. The thing that was taught, drilled into white women, is that everything you do is based on your individual performance. And whether you succeed or fail is 100% on your shoulders.
On you. Mm-hmm.
On you. So the white women, when they they see the workplace, we see the workplace as our individual battle. And we have to do everything we can to rise to the top. And if that involves pushing other people down, so be it, because it is our individual battle. And the Black women were like, I mean, I guess some Black women, from what I understand, do also engage in individual battle, but many of them come together and work together as a way of, surviving and thriving in the workplace.
Karen, I want to say something, because I'd do my father a very disservice if I didn't. That was not my experience. And my father did not sit me down. My mother did not. No one in our family discussed racism. That just didn't happen. We had the discussion about, if you don't make it, it's your fault. It's your fault, because we're giving you the tools. And whatever those tools were for whatever the situation was, my parents were educators. And so my tools were reading, writing, and arithmetic. Learn it, master it, and move on. And it was real simple. It was simple. So life was simple. Friendships, to make friends, was simple. I remember the first time I ever introduced myself as a 4-year-old to the first human being that I felt comfortable saying, "Hi, my name is Danny," by myself, without, being prodded by a grown-up to make a friend, right? So we have to learn how to keep it simple. I want to read something, and I want to end with this. We are all, and the LinkedIn user says, we are all on different levels of consciousness, experience, and education about prejudice, bias, bigotry, and individual and systemic racism. Different levels of conversations and words have to be used to meet people where they are, to help them evolve in their thinking and attitudes. And people still have to be willing. I applaud each of you here for being the ones who try. I want to leave it on that note. Because that's exactly what we have brought here tonight. We have tried. We have had a very difficult conversation. We are, all 4 of us, at very different levels of consciousness and experience and education about all the things. And that is why we come here, so that people can know that there is work to do, but we're here to do it, and we're all resources in whatever way you need. Karen, you have a book, but before we do that, I want to thank my dear friend Jane Holland for coming on here tonight. Sis, I can't thank you enough for just she will go where I tell her to go. So here she is, and thank you. Thank you for being here. And again, sis, thank you so much for your service. Follow all these ladies we're all on LinkedIn. Check us out. Karen, tell us about the book that you read recently, and then let's go ahead and let's get to a baseball game, right, Jane?
Okay, I have 2.
And the score is tied.
Anybody want to know that Yankee game? Scores tied.
I have two book recommendations. This is a wonderful book called The Agitators: 3 Friends Who Fought for Abolition and Women's Rights. And it's about the decades-long friendship between Harriet Tubman and 2 white women. Martha Wright, who was a Quaker mother of 7, and Frances Seward, the wife of William H. Seward, who served over the years as governor, senator, and secretary of state under Abraham Lincoln. And it's about how, all of them benefited tremendously from this friendship. Like, literally, Harriet Tubman could tell Frances Seward something, who would then tell her husband, who would then tell Abraham Lincoln. So this is a great book about interracial friendship, and we need to highlight more of these friendships from history. And then this book recommendation is particularly for you, Jane. That I think to me really opened my eyes to so many things. For a long time, my mentors have been like, "You really need to study the history of white people," and I was like, "The history of white people? My people are the oppressor. Like, I don't want anything to do with my people. I want to keep as far away from my people as possible." Like, no. Finally, it got through to me, and I read this wonderful book called The Caliban and the Witch, which is a history of the witch hunt in Europe. And basically, a lot of the techniques that white men would later use to enslave and colonize began with the public displays of violence against white women. And it lasted for hundreds of years. And I'm convinced that that we are still feeling the reverberations of that in us today. And so I would highly recommend that book.
I think we could all use that. We could all use it.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen, Jane, Michelle. Thank you so much. Karen, thanks for holding this space. I want to thank the audience, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the places we're streaming right now. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. I just hope that we will understand why it's important for us to just be who we are, bring to the table what you bring. Don't be afraid to be a friend, and don't be afraid. I mean, I think fear drives too much. Just be who you are, and let's try to keep it moving. Thanks for putting that in there, Karen. It's called The Agitators. Yeah, great. All right, y'all, wrapping it up. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Appreciate you coming. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.